Sorry. Hi, Dr. Kirshenbaum.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Kirshenbaum for her talk on the unique infant brain is nurtured by touch. Dr. Kirshenbaum, PhD, is a neuroscientist, doula, and infant and family sleep specialist. She is leading Nurture Revolution, hashtag the Nurture Revolution, to change the way our society cares for infants and parents. Greer's company, Nurture Neuroscience, is on a mission to revolutionize the future of health. Greer wants families and perinatal practitioners to understand how early caregiving and experience can boost the mental manage depression, anxiety, and addiction in adulthood by shaping babies' brains through simple, intuitive, enriched experiences in pregnancy, birth, and infancy. Greer works with families to support infant sleep, teach courses, provide consultations in pregnancy and infancy, and is a birth and postpartum doula. Do you need any technical help right now?
Thanks, Stephanie. Let me just take a look. Do I click this square? Let me just test this out.
With the little monitor?
To share a window. Here we go. Okay. I think I did it. Is that working for you?
Yep, I can see that. And I think people have been liking presenter mode. So I'll just stick with you to see if the slides go forward. And when it's set, then I will peace out and I'll leave it to you.
Okay, great.
I will say that when you go in big mode, you won't be able to see the chat. So I'll come back closer to the end and I'll help scroll through the chat to look for questions in case they went flying by. So I can help you with the Q&A at the end.
Okay, sounds good. So I should enter the full mode and then will I just sort of start talking?
Enter the full mode and press 1 or 2, go back and forth between 2 slides to make sure that it's moving and we will see.
Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with you all today. I apologize for missing my slot yesterday. I had a power failure at my house, but I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm really excited to continue to share the science behind nurturing infants and parents and families during the really special time of infancy from 0 to 3 years. So today I'm going to talk about how the infant brain is unique and throughout talk about how it's nurtured by touch. And I think in the realm of infant massage, it's more than touch, right? We talk about connection, eye contact, presence, mirroring affective states, and then of course, physical touch. But we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. My name is Greer Kirshenbaum. I'll give you some contact info at the end if anyone wants to stay in touch. So today, the big outcomes for today's presentation are to understand that the infant brain is unique. It's not necessarily widely known. That stress systems develop in the infant brain, which is one of the, and that's unique for many reasons, but that's the reason that I focus on in teaching families and professionals. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but are you changing slides?
Oh, no, I haven't changed slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll let you know when I do the next one, just make sure it works. And the last is that touch grows the stress system towards resilience. And we're going to sort of embed that idea in through the presentation. I just switched. Did that work out?
No, it did not.
Oh, okay.
Did you do play from start?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Try presenter view first.
Okay. Okay.
Because this has been happening. Worst case scenario, you just scroll through them in the edit mode and we can see them and it'll be okay.
Okay, let me try sharing my entire screen then instead.
That can work too. And then I'll peace out.
Okay, let me know if I make this the whole screen. Does that work?
That looks good. Just try to scroll through one while I'm still here. Perfect, perfect. I'm out. I'll leave you to it. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you. So I always like to include this quote about early life experience. And I always talk about early life experience between 0 and 3 years old, which is surprising to some, maybe not this group. But early life experience between 0 and 3 years is really, really incredible and profound in the way it builds the brain. This image here is taken from neuroscientist Rebecca Sachs. So she went into this MRI scanner with her, I think, under 12-month-old baby or child. I can't remember exactly how old they were. But you can see, the huge difference in their brains here, right? The child's brain is very small, the adult's brain very developed, very folded in its development, reflecting many connections. And the infant brain between 0 and 3 grows to be about 80% the size of an adult brain just in those first 3 years. So the growth is really, really incredible. And the parent and caregivers in the child's life are instrumental in building the connections in their brains in those years too. And so I love the quote that I sort of borrow from Maya Angelou, that I've learned that babies will forget what you said, babies will forget what you did, but babies will never forget how you made them feel. And so, yes, that babies aren't necessarily going to remember a diaper change or sitting in the backyard with you in an autobiographical type of memory, but their implicit memory, their emotional systems are encoding an unbelievably fast speed in these early years. And they absolutely remember how people made them feel. And they actually, I would argue, carry that information with them for every moment of their lives afterwards. So let's dive into the infant brain and understand why it is so unique. So before we talk about the brain, let's look at the terms brain and mind, right? So they're related, but not the same thing. When we talk about our brain, we're talking about the physical structure in our body made up of brain cells called neurons and glial cells. And brain cells form circuits that make up the mind. They form circuits within the brain and within the brain and the body that can be continuous circuits. And we think of the brain as the organ of the mind and body, right? The physical organ. Our mind, we believe, or we observe, arises from our brain and body, and that include our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and our inner sense of self, among many other things. So I think a lot of times when people talk about experience in early life and relationships between adults and their caregivers in early life, we talk about the mind, we talk about attachment and attachment styles. And today we're going to really just be talking about the brain structures that underlie the mind, but we can measure and look at in a really specific way. So let's take a look at the beginnings of the brain development for babies. So brain-mind circuit development, like I said, is incredibly rapid. To just look at some of these brain images, if we look at between 1 week and 3 months, we see almost a doubling of brain matter, which is all connections. Babies are born with almost every brain cell that they're ever going to have. They're just extremely lacking in connections. And it's the experiences they have, including the incredible experiences with their caregivers that are present, loving, effective, with effective touch and conversations, and lots of back and forth, that grow these connections in their brains. So massive growth between 1 week and 3 months. Again, between 3 months and a year, we see almost another doubling. And then 1 year to 2 years, another doubling. By 3 years old, like I said, it's about 80% of the brain is built. By 5 years old, it's about 90%. And then you can see right after 5 years, there's only 10% left to be built. It's not that much. So if we look at the difference between, the early days and 2 years, and then 2 years and 10 years, there's not a huge amount growing after 2-3 years old in terms of mass of structure. The structures all change a lot, but just the brain connections and the brain mass. So babies are born again with these 86 billion neurons and astrocytes, but they don't have the connections. And over the first 3 years, they're building these about 100 trillion connections at a speed of 1 million connections per second. And that's from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child put together that figure. And it's really astounding how quickly the brain develops in that time. And so the way that we can remember this for communication is to teach that cells that fire together wire together. When the more repeated experiences babies have with nurturing experiences specifically, we're going to be building their brain towards resilience, towards building their future potential for positive relationships, mental wellness, success in all their endeavors, and curiosity, intelligence, all the things that we wish for babies. So humans are different than other animals. We know some animals, like the animals in the top figure, like a giraffe, for example, their brain and mind are largely directed by nature or genetics, and they do have nurture influences, but not as much as primates or humans do. We know that we are built by a dance of nature and nurture, or genetics and experience. The two are interacting at a very high level along the whole way. I'm just going to skip through so I have enough time. So the unique neuroplasticity in infancy, this is another image to try to grasp what's going on. So the first panel here, we have cells that are kind of sparse in this panel 1. So this would be a newborn brain. And so we've got cells, but they're not so well connected. The second panel 2, we see lots of connections between all of these cells. And so this is the stage of infancy, right? From 0 to 3, where more than 1 million connections are built per second. And this is our opportunity to be building health into the brain for babies. It's an opportunity that passes because after infancy, the emotional system is not flexible in the same way that it is in infancy. So it really, really is a very, very incredible opportunity to build these connections for babies. After this phase, in panel 3, we see these yellow cells are coming in. This is a mechanism that holds the connections that were used in infancy. So again, the cells that fired together have wired together, and now in this stage are almost sort of glued together by these extracellular matrix. And in figure 4, a lot of the unused connections are pruned away. So there's a lot of brain areas that are built in infancy that I would say are incredibly sensitive to this time, right? All parts of the brain can be remodeled to some extent throughout life with a lot of effort and focus, but the ability of the brain to build in these first 3 years is unparalleled at any other time. So let's briefly talk about the 3 stages of infant brain development, and we're going to focus on the parts of the emotional brain because those are the ones that are building in infancy, and those are the ones that are influenced by all the wonderful things of infant massage and all the other nurturing things that we do for babies. So the brain, we say, is built from the bottom up in a way. So the bottom of the brain here is labeled the survival brain or the brain stem. It's this very, very bottom part. This is developed to some extent when babies are born, but continues to develop as they grow. The next part's the emotional brain or the limbic system. This is the prime time kind of area of infancy. This is the part that we're that we're really, really focused on in building resilience for babies. And the last is the thinking brain, or the cortex. And so a lot of other sources will sort of compare the building of the infant brain like the building of a house. And so if we have a really strong foundation of a survival brain and emotional brain, then the thinking brain can grow to be really strong on that foundation, because it's dependent on the development of the parts that grow previously. And so what does the survival brain do, right? The survival brain keeps babies alive with all of their basic, the basic functions. But again, babies can do these things, but they do them a lot better when they're helped by nurture, right? So breathing's more regular, heartbeat's more regular, absorbing nutrients from food and digestion and crying, and everything is more regulated when babies are spending a lot of time touching caregivers, being held by caregivers, and being in communication with caregivers. And the second thing, I guess we'll go into detail here. So in a lot of ways, the infant and their parent are having these like really incredible, body conversations, right? Where the parents mirroring their state, their breathing, their cardiovascular reactions, muscle tension, facial expressions, and body postures to the infant, and that is in turn able to regulate or even dysregulate the infant as well. So in a positive way, like you can see in this picture, this baby's taking in their parent fully, probably getting a full tummy massage and arm and leg massage by being on her body while she's breathing. She can smell, she can taste, she can touch, she can receive movement, all of these incredible signals that go into her body to signal safety, which then go on to release incredible, what I would call like a nurture bath in the baby's brain, right? Low stress, high oxytocin, and that will go on to develop the emotional brain, as well as regulate all of the body systems. Let's skip that. And then the other thing that survival brain circuits do are communication and bonding, because that's another part of survival for babies, right? Babies can orient to the smell of their caregiver's face. They can put out cues for hunger, play, sleep, touch, and caregivers can learn these communication cues, and when they in turn respond to them, then they're building the next step of the brain, which is the emotional brain. And so this, when that question, everyone's like, where's the baby manual? I say the baby manual is the survival brain, and we need to learn how to understand the communication and bonding cues of babies, understand what they're asking for and what they're needing. And when we do that, those are the instructions to then build resilience into the emotional brain. And then from there, the thinking brain can build to be incredibly, strong, whatever that definition is. It can grow to its potential as well. So the emotional brain, this is going to be the star of our show. We're going to go deeper into what this is and how specifically infant massage and other nurture builds the emotional brain. And so our emotional brain, it's also called the limbic system, and it processes positive emotions and moods, our stress response, reward, resilience, as well as our negative feeling emotions and moods, fear, anxiety, depression, and addiction, right? And so the more that we nurture, the more we can build resilience into the system. Every human is going to be experiencing all of the range of emotions that's available to us, and that's all healthy and wonderful. We just want to try to support as much as we can in babies and ourselves. And so I also really like to teach parents that caregivers, they are a missing brain part in infancy. Babies are completely missing their thinking brain, right? They're all survival brain and emotional brain. And even then their emotional brain is very, very much immature. And so, so how do babies, accomplish this, right? It's their caregivers, their parents and people who take care of them in their life. From conception to age 3, they've got their very strong emotional brain, which is this heart on the seesaw, but they don't have anything that can help regulate, right? People talk about self-regulation and self-soothing. Infants do not have brain parts to effectively do that. And so it's the co-regulation and effective mirroring and input, safety input from their caregivers that allows them to regulate their stress and reduce it. After age 4, their own cognitive brain will start to develop and start to be able to accomplish this task in a small way that can build over time. But again, however old we are, we always benefit from co-regulation too, right? I think people want to rush to like, oh, when will my child just be able to calm down all by themselves? And I just think no person should ever learn, when you're stressed, go be by yourself. That's a very unhealthy way of dealing with stress, right? We want to help teach our babies and teach people that when you're stressed out, you can go and receive input, safety input from someone you know and maybe love to help co-regulate you. We're a social species. We're meant to be doing this for each other. That's not to say that you can never self-regulate. It just depends on how big the stressor is and what the situation is. Okay, so let's go deeper into the stress system development and a little bit of responsive caregiving. So we're not going to talk about every single part of the emotional brain. There's all these ones I've listed here, and there's even more. Today we're going to focus on the first one, which is, there's a lot of names for it. When I teach, I usually call it the rest stress system, because it's a system that puts us in states of stress or threat or states of rest or safety. And we'll go deeper into that. It's also called the limbic hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the LHPA axis. And it's also called the autonomic nervous system, which is sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. In polyvagal theory, there's other words for it as well. Today, we're really going to be focused on the stress system specifically, and you'll see, what I mean in a minute. The other parts of our emotional brain are neurotransmitter systems. These also are forming from 0 to 3 years old. They're also, very, very highly influenced by nurturing care and early life. Our gut-brain axis is also formed in these years in an incredible way. And finally, the other part of our emotional brain are the other minds around us, or the term emotional contagion, right? That our emotions are contagious, that our body states, our emotional states can be passed on to others around us. Just to cover that, what we're talking about today is one part of it, but it's a very important part, and it's a very, very well studied part. So let's talk about this for a minute, the rest stress system. So this is a curve that has in the middle this green zone, and here this is labeled rest. So this is our optimal state for learning, right? So in this state, we're feeling calm, relaxed, regulated, at peace, like everything is just right. This would be the state where a baby would be engaged in an infant massage. They would be engaged in communication and conversation. They would feel calm, curious, and present. And when we shift states of arousal or stress response states into the red zone, then we're sort of entering the stress, fight, or flight states, right? So this is, we can start with feeling silly and excited and sort of get higher and higher into the state, into agitated, mad, hysterical, rage, or even flooded, right? And so when babies and people are in this state, they either need to self-regulate, or in a baby's case, they need the presence of a mature brain of an adult to help them get back into a rested state in order to engage in an activity or learn or do anything that requires their attention. And the other state that is less well known or discussed is a state of freeze, because a baby in a state of freeze might look sleepy or just sort of spaced out, but it is another stress state that's important for parents and professionals to be aware of as well. It also includes the baby feeling like they're under threat with stress hormones in their body. And this can look like being checked out, withdrawn, sort of staring into space, sad, depressed, despair, and even into drowsy and deep sleep states. So this would be another sort of body state where we need to regulate a baby back into a rest state or an adult. And there's also combination states, right? We can have a combination freeze flight or freeze fight state, because it's not really a binary kind of system. We can have mixed states as well. So this is important to remember as we're learning, because we'll see what brain areas are on when a baby is in a rest state. And, you know, the essential idea is that the stress hormones are low, oxytocin is high, right, as a short form to think about that. And in the stress states, we have cortisol in humans is high, adrenaline, other stress hormones, and hormones like oxytocin would be low in that kind of state. And it has implications for how the brain develops. So let's talk about the adult rest stress system. So this is a fully formed, over 25-year-old person, and their stress has 3 basic steps of how it works. So the first is our amygdala as a part of our brain. It's called amygdala. It's like a shape of an almond. That's what it was named after. And it has circuits involved in detecting stress and sounding an alarm to our brain and body. So this could be an external threat, like a snake in your yard, or being cut off in traffic, or it could even be an email. Some stressful email can set off your amygdala. Or it could just be or it could be an internal threat, right? Like a worry, a concern, you know, something that's on your mind that's worrisome, right? So that can set your body off into a stress response. The second part is the hypothalamus in purple here. This is a brain area that initiates stress. So it just releases, it leads to a system to release cortisol into your brain and blood to get your body and brain ready to respond to the stressor. So if it's a snake in your yard, your arms and legs are going to get shot with energy so that you can either run away, you can confront it, or, you know, you might freeze, right? Depending on what the situation is. And then the third step is in your hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, and these areas stop the stress. So let's say it's a snake example. I'm walking in my yard, I see a snake, my amygdala goes off, it says, emergency, get everything ready. The hypothalamus sends out stress hormone, and my brain and body mobilize. But then my prefrontal cortex comes online and says, oh no, I know that snake. I've seen it before. It's harmless, no big deal. Let's just walk away. And that will kind of stop the stress. Another way the stress is stopped is if, like, I run away and some time has gone by and the stressor is no longer there, then the stress hormones will bind to my hippocampus and prefrontal cortex and stop the stress. But the basic thing for us to know is there's this sort of alarm of the amygdala. The cortisol goes out, and then our thinking brain is responsible for stopping the stress. But in infants, it's very different. So they do have an amygdala that's working and is able to detect stress and sound an alarm. Yeah, infants can definitely get feel afraid. The second is their hypothalamus is still learning to initiate stress. It's still being molded very much by experience. And that is it. Their hippocampus is still learning. It's not able to stop stress. Their prefrontal cortex is still learning and is still not able to stop stress. So babies really cannot turn off their own stress. They are completely reliant on their caregivers to help them recover their stress. And so we do, now that we understand this, it's really easy to see why babies are, if we think about attachment kind of work, babies really are always preoccupied with, where's my caregiver? How am I going to get access to them? If I'm secure, then I know that I have access to them and I can just live my life and be curious and have a good time, because I know when I get stressed, I can, count on them to help me out of that very uncomfortable position. And then in other cases, if it's unpredictable or not present, babies are still preoccupied with it, right? Because getting into a state of really high stress is incredibly uncomfortable, and they do need caregivers to help them. So how do babies do it, right? They have their caregivers, right? So their amygdala is working, their hypothalamus releases stress, and then they have caregivers to stop the stress and then teach the whole system how to handle stress in the future. And this is a long 3-year plus process to build this system into the baby's brain. So yes, this is regardless of crying, right? So some people will say, well, if I hold my baby or if I put them down, they're still crying, so whatever, it doesn't matter if I hold them. It's really not true, because inside the baby's brain, the nurture bath, right, or the cocktail of hormones in their brain is very different. The baby here in arms has, let's say this green thermometer here represents oxytocin, and oxytocin has a cascade of other hormones that are beneficial to the infant brain development, and have a very low amount of cortisol, right? The baby that's lying by themselves crying, they have really high cortisol, and they don't have much oxytocin or the oxytocin cascade. So it's incredibly different, these two different states. And yes, the caregiver must be present and responsive, right? So this is applicable to infant massage as well, right? We know when we are in conversation with babies, this is a really pleasurable experience for them. And again, is bathing their brain in these positive hormones versus an unresponsive caregiver. It's very different. So, okay, let's keep going. Okay. So this is the part that I want to focus on, because it's really going to outline the neuroscience of infant massage, of how, infant massage itself and the parenting kind of choices it encourages are so integral in shaping an infant's brain. And so the idea here, the take-home message is, if we can bathe a baby's brain in a nurturing cocktail, a nurturing bath, as much as possible and reliably, we're allowing those brain structures to grow in that environment of nurturing hormones. And I like to focus on the positive parts, because everyone does as much as they can to give babies nurturing experiences. There's not a set amount. It's just as much as you can is good and is going to be building their brain. On the other extreme end, if babies aren't receiving nurture, if they're receiving very low amounts of touch and low amounts of face-to-face conversations and serve and return and support, their brain is likely going to be bathed in a stress kind of bath more, and that's going to influence their brain to be more reactive and to grow to be more vulnerable to mental health issues as they grow up. So let's talk about all these major brain areas that we've already gone over in the stress system and how they're affected by nurturing care, and including massage and wonderful infant communication and all this kind of stuff. So responsiveness teaches the amygdala to detect stress, right? So the amygdala, we know, is working in babies. When they're born, things can scare them. They can sense threats and feel afraid. But the way that they're responded to and cared for in moments of stress, but also in moments where they're seeking interaction, right? Like in a case like infant massage, where a baby's bright-eyed, alert, ready to engage, in that situation, as well as in distress, we're building the amygdala to become more resilient, right? So if we focus on the side here of the responsive caregiver, we can imagine in both of those playful kind of interactions, as well as responding to distress, we're shaping the amygdala to have an adaptive sensitivity to threat detection, right? So that amygdala will grow so that as that person grows up, they're likely to have an adaptive amygdala alarm. It's not going to launch them into a stress response for things that are not adaptive, right? The opposite is being incredibly sensitive and having many things in the environment launch your stress response and turn your stress response on, which can be really common in modern times. The second way is it influences an adaptive versus an overactive alarm. So once the alarm goes off, responsive care can make sort of the volume of the alarm more adaptive versus a bigger alarm, right? And this will lead to, again, a more adaptive stress response versus a huge exaggerated stress response that might be out of proportion to the actual stressor that's in front of somebody. And the last part is the connections to the prefrontal cortex. So we'll see, this was an animal study that was done, which showed that without responsive care in infancy, the amygdala actually grew early and enhanced connections into the prefrontal cortex. And this was also linked to the amygdala having more control over the prefrontal cortex as someone grew up, right? Again, consistent with much more easy to become stressed, have a bigger stress response, and then a longer stress response, right? All of these things leading to challenges for mental health. And so Nim Tottenham at Columbia University, where I did a postdoc and was a research professor, she has done, she's been leading the way in this work. There's a lot of others as well, of course, but her work is really beautiful in amygdala development in humans. Most of these studies started in animal studies, and then Nim has been bringing them to humans and seeing consistent findings. So the next brain area is the hypothalamus. So if it isn't enough that the amygdala is incredibly sensitive to nurturing care, the hypothalamus is also affected, right? So we're really affecting the development of every single brain structure we can possibly imagine in the emotional brain. If you can just think of, pick any areas I mentioned today, other ones outside, they're all being shaped by this responsive care in infancy, right? Again, like I said, in all the infant states, right? In the states where the infant's playful, alert, bright-eyed, and they're looking to engage, and then the caregiver engages with them, and also in the states where they're dysregulated or stressed, and the caregiver is going to respond, and then also in states of sleep. So the hypothalamus, very similar to the amygdala, develops an adaptive or an amplified stress signal to the brain and the body. So when we nurture our babies, do our infant massage, be part of this very present, responsive relationship with them, their hypothalamus also grows to be really adaptive. And we have a pretty striking figure here. This is Tali Barham at the University of California, and she's been leading these studies in the hypothalamus. And you can see here, this is an animal study. The hypothalamus stuff has not yet been brought to humans, as far as I know, but the other areas have. And we see in these studies low maternal care on the left we have very dense cells here, right? And on the right, with high maternal care, which would be a lot of touch, a lot of time together, low stress, we see a low amount of cell labeling here. And so this is actually a good thing because these cells are the stress-producing cells in the pups. And so with the high maternal care, we have a way lower expression of stress hormone production and release. And in adulthood, these animals grow up to have lower measures of anxiety and depression in adulthood, so better outcomes for mental health. And this is just this area. Tally didn't measure the amygdala or the hippocampus or the prefrontal cortex that we're going to talk about too. She focuses on the hypothalamus. And so I believe the last area we're going to talk about is responsiveness teaches the hippocampus to stop stress, right? So we've got this green area is represented here as the hippocampus. And we have these receptors that stop stress that are built when we're responsive to babies in infancy, right? So when we're responsive, their hippocampus grows lots of stop receptors, which means when stress happens and stress goes up, the stop receptors can just say stop and just shut it down really quickly, right? And this avoids a prolonged and high stress response, which is what we want to avoid for our mental health and our physical health. So we really want a lot of these stop receptors in our hippocampus. And again, nurturing care is providing this for our babies. And this is the work of Michael Meany and Moshe Ziff at McGill University. And they showed that actually high amounts of maternal care, licking and grooming pups, this has been replicated in humans as well. I'm going to show that study too. It actually adds proteins onto DNA, which then affects these stop receptors in the hippocampus. But the take-home message is more responsive care, more touch, increases these stop receptors that are so important for controlling stress and influencing our health as we grow. I'm going to skip these. So to review, let's just focus again on the green side. We're looking at what we're doing when we are being really responsive and present as caregivers. We're building the amygdala to be adaptive, to alert us to adaptive, important threats in our environment, and not perhaps things that aren't going to be adaptive to respond to. Our hypothalamus develops an adaptive response to release a good amount of cortisol so that we can react to the threat and then live our lives and get back to normal. And a hippocampus with a lot of stop receptors. So once that stress response is on, the hippocampus can just have a very good control to just shut it off. And so I also add a slide about genetics, right? So some people, many of us inherit different genetic markers that are definitely going to interact with our nurture. But sometimes the genetics can be very, very strong, right? And so when we're nurturing, we're always making a difference in a baby's brain. But a baby that has a certain genetic makeup, and also even epigenetics, which are genetic markers from ancestral experience, sometimes those in combination with nurture are still going to lead to a really high stress response and still going to lead to mental health difficulties. So a baby from the most nurtured place in the world can still grow up and have high stress and mental health challenges. But theoretically, if they receive nurture, they're going to have that buffered, right? They're going to be a lot, sort of taken down the spectrum of vulnerability from the nurture, but it's not necessarily going to make everybody impervious to stressors and mental health. We have a lot of this in our genetics as well. And that's not really the goal, right? The goal is to sort of make our baby's experience the best possible. Every baby's going to have a different experience. Everyone's going to have different genetics. So this example is sort of showing a generic example for, okay, well, what if a particular baby inherits genetic inheritance for a really loud amygdala alarm, right? So let's say that's the case and they have a responsive caregiver. So their amygdala still grows to be really, really loud. And some of the nurture might build the amygdala to sort of temper that a little bit, but it's still going to be really loud because that's what's encoded. But then we've got the hypothalamus that's going to be influenced by nurture, and that can still grow an adaptive kind of response, stress response. And then the hippocampus can also grow an adaptive stress response, right? Not to mention all the other places that we haven't talked about here. So it's really important to know the experience can reduce the impact of inherited factors. And on the other hand, it can also be magnified, right? So when babies do receive unreliable or unresponsive care, if someone's inherited a gene for a loud amygdala alarm, unreliable, unresponsive care can magnify that effect. And that can be very, very stressful. It's a very stressful experience for somebody. Okay, so then we've got our emotional brain that's all developed. And the last part is our cognitive brain, right? And so attention, reason, thinking, planning, and the eventual emotional regulation that everyone wants their babies to have. This all develops through the span of age 3 to age 25, even beyond, and is dependent on what's grown underneath, right? So if we look at this responsive caregiver again, we see this blue prefrontal cortex that's now there, and it's sending its signals down to the amygdala. And now you can see this amygdala and prefrontal cortex have a nice 1-to-1 kind of ratio of communication, right? The amygdala can get stressed. And let's say the snake example again, oh no, there's a snake. And the prefrontal cortex can sort of have a conversation and be like, no, that snake's safe. We're fine, right? And then we can relax. Or the prefrontal cortex can say, yes, wow, that's really big. That's a rattlesnake. That's dangerous. Like, let's get out of here, right? And they can work together to get out. When the prefrontal cortex grows afterwards on a really, really highly responsive stress system, the imbalance is there's an imbalance. So the amygdala and the stress system has a much higher, they have more physical connections there than the prefrontal cortex has back. And it can be much more difficult to act in these stressful situations in a productive way. And this is where therapy happens, right? A lot of therapy that we do as children and adults acts to grow more connections from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala, because that is one place where we still have a lot of plasticity as we grow up. Okay, so I'm just going to want 2 last studies in humans that are relatively new and exciting, and do highlight how touch grows the stress system towards resilience. So we've gone over our model here, just to say one more time that when we are engaged in responding to our baby's cues, social cues, cues for play, cues for interaction, for feeding, for sleep, for distress, all of this responsivity, these signals from the survival brain will say, they're all, when we do respond, they're all building this stress system that we're talking about today, really critically, right? So the stuff that we do for babies really, really matters. So the last 2 studies I will go over quickly, and then we'll take a pause for questions. This one shows, so it's called Epigenetic Programming by Maternal Behavior in the Human Infant. So this was a study done where breastfeeding was used as a proxy for touch. Not to say that we can feed babies by bottle feeding or other ways of feeding with a lot of sensitivity and touch. That is possible, and I definitely teach families about that. But in this study, they found that babies that had low breastfeeding or high breastfeeding, there was a lot of difference in skin-to-skin touch and affiliative touch. So In this study, we see the blue bar, let's look at like near the end, the blue bar is the low breastfeeding group. They've got higher numbers of proteins attached to their stress genes. And the high breastfeeding or the high touch group has lower amounts of proteins attached to their stress genes. So what does this mean? The next graph actually shows that when the babies had high amounts of the protein attached to their stress genes, so they received lower touch, they had lots of proteins, they actually had higher stress response. And so this is kind of tying together all of these relationships we've been talking about today, right? So touch, in this case, is leading to protein changes on the DNA, which is, in this case, is leading to the hippocampus stop receptors, right? So if babies are touched more, they have more hippocampus stop receptors and a lower stress response. And the next study brings in oxytocin, which I've mentioned a few times as a really nurturing hormone. It also gets passed on through genetics, through touch as well. And the study showed that epigenetic dynamics in infancy and the impact of maternal engagement. So when we saw high maternal engagement at 5 months, they had lower amounts of proteins attached to their oxytocin receptors. And what that meant then was at 18 months, those babies who had more touch, fewer proteins on the oxytocin receptors, had more easier going temperaments, also suggested of lower stress, right? Lots to say in the last 2 studies, but the take-home message is more touch, more responsiveness, more interacting with infant cues is leading to protein changes, genetic changes, and changes in the structure of the stress system of the infant brain that are all leading to more resilience, more abilities to handle stress, and more mental and physical health altogether. So that is my bit to share with you all today. You can find me on Instagram at Nurture Neuroscience Parenting, my website, nurtureneuroscience.com, and please feel free to email me as well, nurtureneuro@gmail.com. All right. So should I look at some questions?
Oh, there you are, Stephanie. I'll let you in.
Ashley.
Hi. I didn't know if Stephanie was popping on, so I'm sure she's got this, and she'll ask the questions that people are going to request. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
So I didn't see anybody ask any real questions, so I'm sorry about that. But people were interested in the slides. People would like to see your contact info screen one more time.
Sure. Let's get this up. And here we are.
So let's see. Nobody's got questions. If everybody just holds on. I am doing something. Oh, do parents like to know this information, or is it too much for them to understand?
Yeah, I mean, the parents I work with probably come to me because they do want to know this kind of information. I offer workshops to teach this to parents. But a lot of parents are happy to know, a brief kind of overview, right? That we know there's just incredible benefits to responding, to interacting and to touch, with your baby. I mean, I've written a book on it that's coming out in a year. So I've written that for a parent audience because I think it's important for parents to understand. We've spent like millions, maybe billions of dollars on all this research, and I think parents deserve to know. But I would be careful, right? You want people to opt in to know this information. Sometimes it is too much for some people to take in, and yeah.
Let's see. People would like your email one more time if you could type it into the chat. And have you found the same with premature and disabled children?
Yeah, for sure. Premature babies, 100%. Premature babies benefit so much from the brain building that happens. My son was premature as well. And you have to advocate really, really, really strongly, depending on what environment you're in, what NICU or hospital environment you're in. But it is really, really important to do so. I am not well trained in disabled babies, but I mean, unless there's a contraindication, my feeling would be that all babies would benefit from this. Yeah.
Say hi.
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, I'm being attacked.
Oh no, it's great. My son is usually around too. Yeah, I think for maybe babies with disabilities, it's a matter of what makes them feel good, right? What makes them feel, held, supported, and that could vary, right, depending on what's going on.
That seems to be. Oh yes, if you could pop your email back into if you go to the session.
Oh yeah.
Session and then chat.
Gotcha.
Yes, that way people who are in this one directly. Sorry about that. I know some people put stuff in event and some people put stuff in session.
That's okay.
Well, I would just like to thank you for a wonderful presentation, Dr. Kirshenbaum. I am off to Kamala Rain's next session to introduce her, so I will leave you here for the last couple of minutes to talk with everybody, and I will see you all around.
Thanks, everyone.